She hadn't spoken a word in over a year. Not since the day her father died in a fire her young mind couldn't make sense of. Teachers called it selective mutism. Doctors called it trauma. But Sophie Langley, 6 years old and wrapped in silence, like a second skin, called it nothing at all. Until the day they brought her to the rescue shelter on the outskirts of Willow Creek, and she saw him. A golden retriever, thin, trembling, and covered in old scars, left behind by someone who'd given up on him. He didn't bark, he didn't beg, he simply watched her. His amber eyes reflecting something ancient and aching. She stepped forward, pressed her palm to the metal gate, and whispered a name no one had told her. Briggs. The dog stood, and the silence between them cracked like spring ice under the sun. What happened next baffled scientists, stunned a town, and rewrote the meaning of healing. But to Sophie and Briggs, it was never about science. It was about something deeper, something that lived in their bones long before they met. The late autumn wind rustled through the sleepy streets of Willow Creek, Oregon, a town nestled between fir-covered hills and the faint hum of a forgotten railway. The clouds overhead hung low and heavy, their gray bellies threatening rain that never quite came. Fallen leaves littered the sidewalks like old memories, and the air carried a quiet chill that clung to skin and bone. It was the kind of afternoon where everything felt paused, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Inside a worn silver Subaru parked in front of the Willow Creek Rescue Shelter, a little girl sat wordlessly in the back seat. Sophie Langley, 6 years old, had not spoken in over 10 months. Her blonde curls framed a pale, solemn face, and her hazel eyes were fixed on nothing in particular. Wrapped in a faded teal fleece jacket with only one mitten on, she looked like a photograph, still and silent, with something important missing. In the driver's seat, her mother, Dr. Amanda Langley, checked the shelter hours printed on a flyer she'd folded and unfolded a dozen times. Amanda was in her late 30s with shoulder-length chestnut hair tied back in a hasty bun. Her eyes tired behind square glasses. Once known for her sharp wit and unstoppable energy, she now moved through life with a quiet economy, efficient, focused, but always a little distracted. Since the death of her husband David in a warehouse fire 10 months earlier, Amanda had been parenting Sophie alone while juggling her job as the town's only veterinary surgeon. She spoke softly now, as if the air itself could bruise. "We're just here to look," she murmured. "No promises. Just maybe something will feel right." Sophie didn't respond. She hadn't responded to much lately. The Willow Creek Rescue Shelter was modest, a single-story brick building surrounded by cedar trees and sagging chain-link fencing. The front door creaked open under Amanda's hand, releasing the familiar scent of dog shampoo sawdust, and the lingering trace of antiseptic. A teenager with a clipboard sat at the reception desk. Earbuds in his name tag read, Kyle. He was tall and awkward, no older than 19, with shaggy dark hair and a sleepy look that made him seem constantly mid-yawn. Amanda signed in, and Kyle pointed them down the corridor toward the back kennels. "We got a few new intakes this week, one of them. Well, you'll see. He's in 14. Amanda gave a polite nod and gently touched Sophie's shoulder. The girl walked slowly, hands at her sides, brushing against the walls as if grounding herself in the texture of painted concrete. The hall echoed with soft whines and the shuffle of paws behind wire doors. And then Sophie stopped. Kennel Sure 14. The dog inside didn't move at first. He was curled tightly into one corner as if trying to disappear. Golden Retriever male, according to the notes Amanda had glanced over earlier. No collar, no microchip, maybe 8 years old. His once golden coat was dulled with dirt and patchy in places, with a deep scar stretching from his left ear to the back of his neck. One eye remained half shut, and he seemed to breathe with effort, slow and shallow, Amanda crouched beside Sophie, already forming her clinical thoughts: malnutrition, likely, hip dysplasia, possible abuse. But then something subtle shifted. The dog raised his head. He looked straight at Sophie. Sophie stepped forward, completely unprompted. No hesitation. Her tiny boots squeaked on the polished concrete. She reached out slowly and placed her small palm against the cage the dog stood. There was no growl, no bark, only movement measured and quiet. He limped forward and gently pressed his broad, scarred head against the mesh where Sophie's hand waited. His amber eyes locked onto hers, and for a long moment they simply stared. Sophie's lips parted, and then barely louder than a breath, she whispered, "Briggs." Amanda's heart stopped. Not because Sophie had spoken, though that alone would have shaken the earth, but because of how the dog had responded. At the sound of the name, the dog sat down with a calm grace, his entire posture softening, as if the name was one he'd known all along behind them. Kyle leaned his head into the hallway. Did she just name him? Amanda turned her head slightly, keeping her eyes on the connection unfolding. I think she did. Kyle whistled low and surprised. Nobody's gotten close to him. He won't eat unless we're gone. Amanda nodded slowly. He doesn't seem to mind her. She rose, exhaling, her thoughts tangled. It wasn't the first time she'd seen strange connections between children and animals, but this was different. It wasn't the look of a scared dog and a curious child. It was something deeper, something weighted like recognition, but she said nothing. Instead, she gently touched Sophie's shoulder. We should keep moving. There are others. Sophie didn't protest, but her fingers lingered on the wire a second longer before she turned. The dog, now. Briggs, though, unofficial, watched her retreat with eyes that didn't blink until she vanished around the corner. Amanda glanced back, and Briggs lowered his head, curled up once more, and returned to his stillness. Later that evening, back in the small home, shaded by evergreens, Amanda made tea in the kitchen, while Sophie sat at the dining room table scribbling in crayons. One, drawing in particular, caught Amanda's eye. A girl with tangled hair, a dog with tired eyes, and a name written in blocky letters underneath Briggs. Amanda paused. Then, without a word, she walked to her study and opened an old, untouched folder on her laptop. Empathy and Autism, Cross-Species Interaction Notes. She stared at the blinking cursor. She didn't write anything. Not yet. Outside, the wind began again, carrying with it the first drops of the long-promised rain. The rain had not stopped since the night they returned from the shelter. It tapped rhythmically against the windows of the Langley home, as if nature itself had decided to echo Sophie's silence. But inside, something was changing. The following morning, Sophie rose earlier than usual. Amanda found her sitting by the front window fully dressed, watching the clouds drift low over the hills of Willow Creek. No cartoons, no cereal, just stillness and focus. Amanda watched her daughter for a moment, a steaming mug in hand, uncertain of what to say. There had been no mention of the shelter visit the night before, not even a glance back at the sketch Sophie had made of Briggs. But something in the air felt taut electric, like a radio dial just shy of the right frequency. 3 days passed, and Sophie remained silent. Yet Amanda noticed a shift in her daughter's behavior, small, delicate things. Sophie lingered near the study more often, where Amanda had reopened her research notes. She began arranging her stuffed animals in careful circles, not lines, and she used gestures to command them. Raise a paw, lie down, roll. Over Amanda watched from the kitchen, recognizing the rhythm, the clarity of intent in each motion. It was mimicry, yes, but precise. Intentional. On Saturday, Amanda made a decision. She called the shelter and asked if they'd allow a second visit. Briggs hadn't been adopted. He was still in Kennel 3/14, Amanda didn't say why she wanted to see him again. She just made the appointment. When they arrived, Kyle wasn't at the front desk this time. Instead, a woman stood behind the counter. Debbie Harlow, the shelter's weekend coordinator. Debbie was in her early 50s, short and stout, with laugh lines around her eyes and hands that looked permanently smudged with ink or dog food. She wore a sweatshirt emblazoned with a cartoon of a cat carrying a protest sign that read, "Adopt or I'll poop on your bed." "Hi there," Debbie greeted them, her voice warm but cautious. "You're the Langley girls, right? Heard about what happened with number 14. Amanda nodded. "We'd just like to spend a little time near him if that's allowed." "Sure thing," Debbie said, grabbing a key from the hook. "He hasn't been himself. Barely eats. But he gets up when he hears footsteps." They moved down the hallway to the kennels. Sophie walked slowly, not looking left or right, until she reached the same spot Briggs was lying down again. But this time his head lifted the moment she appeared. His ears perked. He stood slower than before. But with purpose, Amanda knelt beside Sophie and watched. Without speaking, the little girl tilted her head slightly to the left. Briggs sat. She extended her hand, palm downward. Briggs lay down. Then she wiggled her fingers in a curling motion near her side. Briggs rolled Amanda's breath. Caught. Did she teach him that she asked aloud? Though no one answered. Debbie blinked. He doesn't do that for staff, not even for food. Amanda said nothing more. She didn't want to break the thread. Sophie was smiling softly, faintly, but it was real. A light behind her eyes that Amanda hadn't seen in months. Back home, Amanda returned to her notes with fresh urgency. She opened a folder labeled Phase 2, Empathic Response Triggers. The files were dusty, incomplete. She'd abandoned them years ago, back when the academic world demanded quantifiable metrics, and Sophie had been a healthy toddler with no signs of trauma. But now she saw something real. Unmeasurable, yes, but undeniable. She picked up the phone and dialed an old number from memory. After 3 rings, a voice answered. Dr. Harvey Monroe. "Harvey, it's Amanda Langley." There was a pause. "Well, I'll be damned, Amanda. I haven't heard that name since I dropped my thesis and disappeared." "Yeah," she said with a dry laugh. "I need your help. I think I've found something." Dr. Harvey Monroe was a distinguished neuroscientist specializing in cross-modal cognition, how the brain processes relationships between visual cues, touch, and language. He was in his late 60s now, with a trimmed gray beard and a calm, deliberate way of speaking. Back in grad school, Amanda had respected him more than any other professor. He had the rare ability to ask questions no one dared, and the patience to sit with silence until it answered. "Tell me everything," he said. So she did. About Sophie's silence, about the shelter visit, about the golden retriever who responded not just to commands but to intent. Harvey didn't interrupt once. When she finished, he simply said, "Can you bring me video?" Amanda hesitated. "I can try." The next day, with permission from the shelter, Amanda set up her phone across from kennels of 14. Sophie didn't notice. She walked to the gate, made a sequence of motions, left tilt, palm down, finger curl. Briggs responded in perfect rhythm as if they had trained together for months. Amanda sent the video to Harvey. That night, he replied with only one sentence. "Amanda, this is significant." A week passed since Amanda had sent the video to Dr. Harvey Monroe, and the skies above Willow Creek remained the same, a pale gray, stretching like old linen over the evergreens and rooftops. The air had grown colder, sharpening the edges of each morning. Sophie, however, moved through the chill, untouched, her demeanor unchanged, yet unmistakably altered. She had not spoken since that single word at the shelter yet. Her world had clearly expanded. She communicated now, not with words, but through her eyes, her hands, her posture, and always her gestures were directed at one image in her sketchbook. Briggs' Amanda watched quietly, as Sophie used crayons to draw elaborate sequences. Briggs sitting, Briggs lying down. Briggs watching her. Amanda saw patterns. Each page felt like a code she couldn't read but knew was consistent. Sophie wasn't just remembering, she was recording. Amanda decided it was time. With permission from the shelter, she scheduled a visit to bring Briggs to her clinic for a wellness check, under the official pretense of a community outreach effort. It wasn't adoption. Not yet, but it gave her the chance to do what she needed: gather a blood sample. That Tuesday, Briggs was carefully transported to Pine Hollow Veterinary Clinic, where Amanda worked part-time. The building sat on the edge of the forest, its cedar frame and wide porch making it look more like a mountain lodge than a medical facility. Inside, everything was spotless and organized. Amanda's way of keeping control in a life that had lost so much of it. Briggs was calm from the moment he entered. He moved slowly but with awareness, sniffing corners and pausing as if remembering something. Amanda guided him gently into the exam room, where she was met by Caleb Finch, her technician, a soft-spoken man in his early 40s with thinning hair-round glasses and a habit of humming classical music under his breath when nervous. "Is this the dog?" Caleb asked, crouching low. "He's bigger than I thought." Amanda nodded. 8 years old. Give or take golden retriever. But there's something odd about him. I want a full panel. Blood chemistry. Genetic markers, the works. Caleb blinked. That's more than standard intake. Amanda removed her glasses. This isn't standard. Caleb, loyal and curious by nature, didn't argue. He simply nodded and began preparing the equipment. Briggs stood perfectly still during the draw. Not even flinching, Amanda noticed again the alertness in his eyes. Not anxious, not passive. Just aware. Too aware. 2 days later, Amanda sat at her desk reviewing the results. She had run countless tests over the years on livestock pets, even wildlife in emergencies. But nothing looked like this. Briggs's markers didn't match the baseline for a purebred golden retriever. In fact, a segment of his DNA didn't match any known domestic canine database at all. There it was, highlighted in red, unknown hybrid, gene cluster sequence, irregularity, 41.9%. She stared at it, her fingers frozen above the keyboard. That evening, she called Harvey Monroe. "Harvey, I got the results." "Talk to me," he said. "He's not normal. Briggs has a gene cluster I've never seen before, and not just rare, unclassified, it doesn't match domestic dog genomes." Harvey exhaled slow and steady. "Send it to me. I want to cross-reference it with something I've been looking at." Amanda paused. "With what? Sophie's pediatric blood work." There was a beat of silence. "Harvey, that was from years ago. I kept it. With your permission. I ran comparative sequences when trying to understand how nonverbal children process environmental stress. Amanda, if what I'm thinking is true, this might be bigger than Briggs." She didn't ask questions. She just sent the files. 3 days passed before Harvey responded. The message came at night buried in her inbox with the subject line, "Call me urgent." She dialed immediately. "You're not going to believe this," he said, skipping any greeting. "I ran the comparative genome sequences. Amanda, there's overlap." "What kind of overlap? I mean literal match. There's a mirrored strand in both of them. Sophie and the dog. It's not identical, but it's functionally resonant. The kind of thing you only see between twins. I cross-checked against every known human-animal interface project. Nothing. This isn't just a shared trait, it's a linked sequence." Amanda sat down slowly. "Briggs and Sophie are genetically connected," she asked. "It's not inheritance, it's not mutation. It's a phenomenon I've only seen in theory, cross-species genetic resonance, a match so close it defies evolutionary divergence. Amanda, it's like they're tuned to the same frequency. Amanda glanced toward the hallway where Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch, one hand draped over a crayon drawing of a girl and a dog walking through stars. "What do we do?" she whispered. "I want to run further tests. Controlled observations. But this is the beginning of something I never thought I'd see." That weekend, Amanda sat with Sophie at the kitchen table. She didn't press her daughter with questions. Instead, she pointed to one of the drawings, Briggs standing in a field under a bright moon. "Did he really do that?" Sophie didn't answer, but she nodded. The first frost came early to Willow Creek. Thin sheets of ice spread across the porch railings, and the maple trees stood bare, their leaves long since swept away by the wind. Amanda stood in the kitchen, a cup of untouched coffee in her hand, watching Sophie from the doorway. The little girl sat on the floor, legs folded under her crayons, scattered in a wide arc around her like petals. She wasn't drawing anymore, just staring at the paper. The picture beneath her hand was incomplete. A dog behind a fence and a girl on the other side. It had been 3 days since the officials arrived. The knock on the door had come just before dinner. Amanda answered to find 2 men and a woman standing on the porch. They wore dark blue jackets with the seal of the Oregon Department of Biological Safety, their faces stern with the weight of protocol. The woman stepped forward. First, Elaine Vickers, mid-40s, sharply dressed in a gray suit with pin-straight black hair and sharp cheekbones. Her voice was measured, polite, but unbending. "Dr. Langley, we're here under Article 17B of the Oregon Bioethics Code. We've received documentation of an unregistered organism with an unclassified genetic profile in your custody." Amanda's throat went dry. "Briggs." Vickers nodded. "Given his genetic deviation and your own lab-confirmed results, he qualifies as a Category 3, hybrid, non-domestic, unapproved for private containment. He'll need to be transferred to Hillstone Labs effective immediately." Amanda stepped in front of the doorway. "He's not dangerous. That's not for us to determine. Until further research is conducted, his containment is a matter of public safety." Sophie had appeared at the top of the stairs barefoot and small, clutching a worn, stuffed dog to her chest. Amanda didn't look back. She didn't want Sophie to see her panic. "What happens to him there?" she asked. "Observation containment." "He won't be harmed." But Amanda had worked in enough state labs to know observation could mean a dozen things. Now, days later, the house was quieter than it had been in months. Sophie hadn't spoken, not with her eyes, her hands, or even her drawings. It was like something inside her had folded inward again, like a flower closing against frost. Amanda sat at her desk that night, flipping through every legal avenue she could find. She reached out to Eleanor Nash, an environmental lawyer she had known during her college years. Eleanor was tall, thin, and wore her graying curls in a wild crown with sharp eyes, and a personality that had once intimidated Amanda into dropping pre-med debates. Now, in her 50s, Eleanor practiced law in Eugene, focusing on animal rights and environmental ethics. "You're going to have a hard time with this," Eleanor said over Zoom, squinting at Amanda through thick glasses. "The second you submitted that blood work to a state database, it triggered a regulatory flag. Hillstone is state-sponsored. They're not letting go of that dog unless you can prove he's medically essential to a human patient or part of a protected study." Amanda hesitated. "What if he is?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Then get me documentation." Meanwhile, across the state, Dr. Harvey Monroe moved into action. The old university lab he once worked in was long retired, but he still held emeritus privileges and access to independent funding. He spent days buried in genetic databases building a proposal under a new title, Project Empath. The file sat open across 3 screens, detailing the shared sequences between Sophie and Briggs, charting behavioral observations, and mapping a theory most in his field would laugh at. But Harvey wasn't laughing. He was obsessed. He brought in a single assistant, Dr. Eli Chen, a second-generation Taiwanese-American neurobiologist with a background in animal cognition. Eli was 34, lean and precise with steady hands and a cautious nature. He spoke little, but when he did, his words cut cleanly. "I've seen canines mirror behavior before," Eli said as he examined the footage Amanda had sent. "But this is a pattern of anticipation, not reaction. The dog isn't following commands. He's anticipating intent. That doesn't happen without either training or something deeper." Harvey pointed at the DNA sequence on screen. "And that something is in here." Or between them, Eli said, they submitted a formal research request to Hillstone Labs demanding access to Briggs as a research subject. The proposal listed Sophie Langley, not as a minor, but as a primary neurological case study under medical observation. The gambit was risky but legal. If granted, it would establish both Briggs and Sophie as protected co-participants in a federally sanctioned study. But the system moved slowly, and Sophie was fading. Amanda found her sleeping on the floor again that evening, curled up against the base of the couch. Her drawings were untouched. Her appetite had withered. The light in her eyes flickered like a flame in a jar. Amanda sat beside her and whispered, "We're not giving up." Sophie didn't move. Amanda placed a hand over her daughter's back and silently prayed without knowing to whom. The Hillstone Biological Research Facility stood like a fortress on the outskirts of Salem, Oregon, its stark white buildings rising from the mist like bones of a sleeping giant. Surveillance cameras lined the gates, and motion sensors guarded each hallway. Inside, silence reigned clinical metallic cold. In one of the lower-level containment wings, Briggs lay curled in a corner of a climate-controlled enclosure, his once glossy fur dulled to a lifeless tan. He no longer approached the gate when researchers entered. He no longer responded to voices, food bowls, or noise. His breathing was shallow, his eyes dim to the staff. He was an anomaly, a Category 3, hybrid exhibiting rapid neurological decline. To the computers, he was Subject 147B, D. But to one person in the building, he was still. Briggs Ellie Rayner. 26 years old, fresh from her Ph.D. in comparative behavioral biology, moved through Hillstone like a ghost in a borrowed body. Slender, pale, with copper-blonde hair she always kept twisted into a nervous bun. Ellie had joined Hillstone with the wide-eyed ambition of someone who still believed research could change the world. She believed in science, but not in silence. Not like this. In the beginning, she'd followed protocols without question. Daily logs, neurological scans, emotional detachment. But after a week of observing Briggs, something inside her began to unravel. The first thing she noticed was his stillness, not calm, defeated. And the way his gaze lingered on the far wall where the door sometimes clicked but never opened, as if he were waiting for something or someone. Ellie stayed after hours one evening against regulation and sat cross-legged outside his enclosure. She didn't say anything, just stared back at him until his eyes flicked to meet hers. A full minute passed, then Briggs gave a low exhale, and something like pain flickered across his brow. She wrote it in her notebook, depression response or grief. Back in Willow Creek, Sophie woke from her 4th nightmare in 6 nights. Her tiny frame trembled beneath her comforter, her breathing erratic. Amanda rushed in and found her daughter clutching her left hand, specifically the back of her wrist, where the faint leaf-shaped birthmark had always been. But tonight, Sophie's fingers were smeared with blood. Amanda gasped. "You scratched it again," She carried Sophie to the bathroom, gently cleaning the tiny cuts around the mark. But Sophie didn't flinch. Her eyes were distant, as if she were seeing through the walls and into something far beyond. "Was it the dream again?" Amanda whispered. Sophie nodded just once. Amanda held her closer. "What did you see?" Sophie opened her mouth. A sound came. Not a word, just a soft, strangled whimper. She pointed to the birthmark. Amanda froze. "You saw blood." Another nod. That morning, Amanda emailed Monroe and Eli, attaching pictures of the irritated skin. Monroe called within 10 minutes. "She's manifesting psychosomatic projection," he said, voice tense. "Whatever this resonance is, it's active. Briggs' removal may have caused a system-wide shock in Sophie's neurological loop. We need data from inside Hillstone. Something direct." Amanda sighed. "They won't let me near him. But someone inside might." That night, Amanda received a message from a private address buried in her inbox. Subject: "You don't know me." Message: "I work at Hillstone. Something is wrong. Briggs is shutting down, and I think it's because he's not with her. They won't listen. But maybe you can." The signature read, E. Rayner. Amanda's hands trembled. She wrote back immediately. "What are they doing to him?" 10 minutes later. "Nothing invasive. Yet. But they're talking about full genome splicing to isolate the trait. I don't know what it is, but I know what it's doing to him. He's grieving. I've seen it before. But never this deep. If you want to stop them, do it soon." In a basement office in Hillstone. Ellie stared at Amanda's reply, her heart hammering. She minimized the email window just as Dr. Benedict Thorne, the director of the Hybrid Genome Department, entered the hallway. Thorne was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered and gray-haired with piercing eyes, and a voice that could silence a room. A brilliant mind, but cold, too cold. Still monitoring 147B, he asked, pausing beside her. "Yes, sir," Ellie replied, feigning calm. "Same baseline, run another scan. I want complete neural mapping by Friday." As he walked away, Ellie closed her eyes and whispered under her breath, "You won't have time." Back in Willow Creek. Amanda walked into Sophie's room just after sunset. Her daughter sat at her desk drawing again. Shaky, uneven lines, but unmistakable. A large dog lying in a circle of light. And next to it a small girl, holding a glowing thread between them. Amanda touched the page gently. "Do you still feel him?" Sophie didn't speak, but she nodded. And the leaf-shaped mark on her hand pulsed a shade darker. The wind over Willow Creek had shifted, growing warmer, though the sky remained the same muted gray. A strange tension hummed through the town, as though the land itself sensed a boundary being tested. Inside the Langley house, Amanda sat hunched over the dining table, surrounded by stacks of papers, digital scans, and genetic diagrams. The coffee in her mug had gone cold hours ago, but her mind burned. Across from her doctor, Harvey Monroe's voice crackled through the laptop speaker, calm but pulsing with urgency. "We ran the simulation 3 times, he said, and every outcome is the same. Sophie and Briggs share a rare genomic feedback structure. They're biologically distinct but in resonance, not unlike matched blood types, but at the stem cell level." Amanda leaned in. "You're saying they're compatible. Not just compatible. Potential conduits. The sequence that mirrors between them, it's responsive. We believe it's the reason Briggs reacts to her presence the way he does. The same goes for Sophie's neurological stabilization when he's nearby." On the screen beside Monroe, Dr. Eli Chen appeared, pointing to a 3D rendering of 2 spiraling DNA strands, one human, one canine, connected by glowing threads. "It's theoretical," Eli said, "but the gene link is behaving like a living bridge. If we transfer stem cells between them both directions, it might create a regenerative loop. Sophie's immune system could stabilize. Briggs's neurological functions could recover. Think of it like jump-starting two fading batteries by looping them together. Amanda's hands clenched. "You want to transplant dog stem cells into my daughter? It's radical," Monroe admitted. "But so is what's happening, and time is not on your side. Either we try, or we watch them both fade." She looked toward the hallway. Sophie was curled on the couch, her cheeks pale. The fire in her hazel eyes nearly extinguished. Her crayon drawings had stopped again, but the leaf-shaped birthmark on her wrist, darker now, seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. Amanda closed her eyes. "Do it." Meanwhile, inside Hillstone, Ellie Rayner worked quietly under the hum of fluorescent lights. She had copied every lab note on Briggs into a secured drive documenting the dog's deteriorating vitals. His heart rate had slowed. His cortisol levels were rising. But most troubling of all was the behavioral data. Briggs had stopped reacting even to stimuli that once soothed him. His pupils didn't dilate at food, scent, or sound. Ellie marked the chart. Degenerative empathic shutdown. Probable trigger-forced separation. That night, Ellie received a flash drive from Eli Chen smuggled in via Monroe's internal network. On it were the comparative genome maps, the simulations, and the experimental protocol. When she reviewed the files alone in the lab's archival room, she couldn't breathe. "They're not just bonded," she whispered. "They're part of the same system." The next morning, Ellie risked everything. She slid the flash drive into Benedict Thorne's office mail slot without a note. It was a gamble, but she hoped that even the coldest scientist couldn't ignore what it showed. She was wrong. Thorne called a meeting that afternoon. Standing at the head of the conference table in his tailored Navy suit, he held the flash drive in one hand like it was a loaded weapon. "This file was submitted anonymously," he said. "If you're in this room, I assume you've already seen it." No one spoke. Ellie kept her gaze down. Thorne's voice remained cold. "Project Empath has no federal oversight, no IRB approval, and relies on data that violates containment protocol. However," he paused, holding up a page, "the cross-species resonance theory aligns with observations we've recorded in Subject 147B. Therefore, under the Exceptional Ethics Clause will allow a monitored trial. One attempt. If results are inconclusive, the project ends." Ellie exhaled slowly. It wasn't full victory, but it was enough. Back in Willow Creek, Amanda wasn't ready to leave things to science alone. That evening, she took a drive out past the tree line where the paved road turned to gravel, and the forest pressed closer on both sides. There, tucked in a moss-covered cabin beside an old cedar grove, lived a man named Jeremiah Cross. Jeremiah was in his 70s, a broad-shouldered native man, with long silver hair tied in a low braid and hands like carved wood. He was known as a healer, a historian, and to some a mystic. Amanda had only met him once years ago after a horse broke its leg on her watch. He had said then, "Some wounds go deeper than the body." She hadn't forgotten. "Jeremiah opened the door before she knocked. I was wondering when you'd come." Amanda blinked. "You remember me?" "I remember your daughter." She followed him inside. The air smelled of cedar smoke and dried herbs. Bones and feathers hung from the beams, but not as decoration, each piece placed with purpose. "I need your help," Amanda said simply. Jeremiah nodded once. "You've already chosen the path. I can only tell you the story you're walking into." He motioned to the fire and sat opposite her. "Long ago," he began, "there were children born with what we called the golden thread. They weren't prophets, not witches, just bridges between the wild and the wounded. Their marks were signs, not curses, a leaf, a paw, a thread. These children didn't just heal, they anchored things' lives, hearts, even the land. But if the bond was severed, they suffered. And sometimes so did the other side. Amanda stared into the flames. Sophie has a mark. So did he, Briggs. Jeremiah smiled not unkindly. Then the story is already yours. Back home, Amanda found Sophie awake, sitting in bed with her sketchpad. On the page was a new drawing. A dog, a girl, and between them a strand of gold running from wrist to chest. Amanda brushed a hand across Sophie's hair. It's almost time. Sophie didn't speak, but she didn't look afraid. At the heart of Hillstone Labs, beneath layers of reinforced concrete and glass, a room that had never existed before came to life. A hybrid suite, part veterinary surgical theater, part pediatric intensive care unit, was constructed in secret, funded by emergency grants and cloaked under provisional ethics clearance. And in that room, the two subjects of Project Empath lay side by side, divided by a single pane of sterile plexiglass. Sophie Langley, 6 years old, her heart rate faint but steady, and Briggs, an 8-year-old golden retriever with a fading pulse and graying whiskers. The room was lit in sterile blue monitors, beeped with slow rhythm, and machines hummed with clinical indifference. Amanda stood beyond the partition clad in scrubs, her hair tucked into a surgical cap. Her eyes were locked, not on the machines, but on the fragile rise and fall of her daughter's chest. This was the moment science had promised and faith had demanded. Dr. Harvey Monroe stood at the command station directing both medical teams. His voice was calm, his hand steady, but there was a glint in his aging eyes that spoke of awe more than certainty. Opposite him was Dr. Helena Ruiz, a soft-spoken pediatric immunologist with dark curls pulled into a no-nonsense braid. In her mid-40s, Helena was widely regarded as one of the most compassionate minds in the field of experimental therapies. She had joined the operation after reviewing the genome maps, and despite initial skepticism had whispered one word upon seeing the resonance pattern: extraordinary. On Briggs's side, the veterinary lead was Dr. Raj Mehta, a tall, stoic man of Indian descent with steady hands and a quiet reverence for animals. Raj believed in precision, but also in the idea that some creatures knew more than they let on. He had seen too much in the field to call anything impossible anymore. The procedure began at dawn. Briggs was sedated first, and a portion of his marrow was carefully extracted from his hip, filtered and prepared. Sophie's marrow was harvested next, an even more delicate process, monitored to the second. The samples were passed like sacred offerings between the two tables. Then came the moment of crossing. Dr. Ruiz injected the prepared canine stem cells into Sophie's bloodstream, watching as her vitals fluctuated, but held Dr. Mehta. Introduced Sophie's cells into Briggs's weakened system. Silence overtook the room. Then the machines began to level. Monroe whispered, "It's holding." But something else happened too. Amanda pressed her hands to the glass, watching in disbelief as Sophie's fingers twitched. Her left hand, the one bearing the leaf-shaped birthmark, slowly rose in her unconscious state, drifting toward the transparent divider. And on the other side, Briggs's paw lifted, mirroring her movement almost perfectly. It brushed the glass and came to rest exactly opposite Sophie's palm. Gasps escaped the team. No one moved. No one dared break the spell. "Is she awake?" Dr. Ruiz murmured. "No," Monroe said, voice shaking. There attuning, back in the administrative wing of Hillstone, Ellie Rayner stared at her open resignation letter. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but conviction. The things she had seen here, the moments they were choosing to hide under bureaucratic veils and scientific ownership. It was no longer just about data. It was about truth, and the world needed to see it. She stuffed the final reports, gene maps, and video footage into an encrypted drive. The file was labeled Project Empath. Full disclosure, It included not only Briggs's deterioration and Sophie's symptoms, but the synchronized movements during sedation, the gene resonance maps, and every internal memo from Monroe and Chen. That night, she leaked it. First to a trusted journalist from a small nonprofit science outlet, then to a major national paper, then to a medical watchdog group. By morning, it was everywhere. The girl and the golden retriever. A biological bond that defies science. Cross-species healing or medical folklore. New leaks, rock, genetic ethics board. Unseen footage shows unconscious. Girl reaching out for dog during experimental surgery. Amanda saw the headlines while pacing the waiting lounge outside the recovery suite. Her phone lit up with dozens of messages. Eleanor Nash, the lawyer, called with a mix of panic and triumph in her voice. "You've just become a symbol," she said. "Be careful. They'll either crucify you or canonize you." Amanda stared through the glass at Sophie, still unmoving. But her daughter's fingers never dropped from the glass, and neither did Briggs's paw. The sun returned to Willow Creek in late April with golden light that filtered through the fir trees and soaked into the hills like warm tea into cloth. It had rained for weeks following the procedure, as if the land itself had held its breath. But now, Oregon breathed again, and so did Sophie Langley. It began with a flutter of eyelashes in the dawn light. Amanda was dozing in a chair beside her daughter's recovery bed when Sophie stirred. The little girl blinked her chest, rising in deeper, steadier breaths, and then she whispered not a groan, not a name, but a question. "Where's Briggs?" Amanda dropped the mug in her hand. It hit the floor with a dull clatter. Her heart soared and cracked at the same time. He's here," she said, voice trembling. "He's waiting." Across the partition in a recovery pen with padded walls and soft lighting. Briggs had begun showing signs of true return. The cloudiness in his gaze was gone. His breathing, once shallow and broken, now matched a healthy rhythm. His tail wagged weakly when Amanda entered, but when Sophie's wheelchair rolled in, days later his whole body lit up. The reunion wasn't loud, it was soft and sacred. Sophie slid off the chair onto the mat. Briggs stepped forward, slowly limping slightly, and laid his head against her chest. Her fingers curled instinctively into the fur behind his ears. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Every monitor in the room picked up the same strange thing. A syncopation in their vitals, heart rate, respiration, neurological waveforms that no one could explain. "You're seeing this, right?" muttered Dr. Helena Ruiz to Monroe, blinking at the screens. Harvey Monroe simply nodded, tears forming in the creases of his weathered face. "This," he said, "isn't science. This is what science was always meant to find." Weeks passed. Sophie's strength returned faster than expected. She began speaking again, not just in whispers but full playful sentences. Her speech therapist cried the first time Sophie said thank you. Amanda nearly dropped to her knees when she heard her laugh. And Briggs, now 10 pounds heavier, his coat once again shimmering in the sunlight, followed her everywhere. His eyes never strayed far from her, even when children visited the new sanctuary. That sanctuary, Golden Haven, was built on a donated plot of land just outside Willow Creek, funded by Grant's private donations and a surge of nationwide support following Ellie's whistleblowing. What had begun as a story whispered in scientific circles had become a movement. Golden Haven wasn't just a place. It was a program, a philosophy. Sophie, only 7, now became its youngest mentor. With her small frame, still fragile but determined, she led small groups of neurodivergent children through carefully structured animal interaction sessions. She didn't lecture. She demonstrated with touch, with calmness, with silence when needed. Briggs always nearby. Amanda and Ellie co-led the training sessions. Monroe, now semi-retired, moved between teaching at the university and serving as scientific advisor. The three of them developed the first draft of what would become a revolutionary educational and therapeutic model, the Golden Thread Protocol. It focused on resonance not just between child and animal, but between intention and response, emotion and behavior. For Ellie, it was the culmination of her conscience. She had taken a stand, sacrificed her career in formal research, and found herself in the field again among laughter, dirt fur, and real change. One late summer afternoon, Jeremiah Cross visited Golden Haven. His gait was slower than before, his hair now more silver than gray, but his voice retained the quiet power of earth and root. He watched Sophie for a long while without saying a word. She was sitting in the grass, her sketchbook open on her lap, Briggs dozing beside her in the sun. When Amanda approached, Jeremiah placed a small bundle into her hands. "She should have this," he said, "before the winter comes." Amanda opened the cloth. Inside was a simple wooden bracelet, delicately carved with the shape of a leaf smoothed with age. There were etchings too worn and faint threads swirling in a spiral, joining leaf to paw, girl to dog. "She carries the thread," Jeremiah said softly, "but it's not just hers now. You've all become part of it." 2 weeks later, Jeremiah passed away in his sleep. The bracelet remained on Sophie's wrist. As autumn deepened and the wind took on its cool clarity again, Golden Haven remained full of life, of second chances of voices once silenced beginning to rise. Visitors came from across the country to witness the bond that had once existed only in stories. One visitor, a teenage boy named Caleb, who hadn't spoken since losing his twin brother in a car accident, placed his hand gently on Briggs's head during a session. Sophie simply nodded beside him, and for the first time in nearly 2 years, Caleb whispered, "Thank you." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines, Sophie walked to the edge of the sanctuary's main field with Briggs and knelt beside him. She drew a picture in the dirt with a stick. 2 figures, one, a small one, with 4 legs. A line connected their hearts. Amanda watched from the porch, her hand on her chest. When Sophie looked back, she smiled. Not a smile born of healing, but one of knowing, of becoming, of returning whole. Sometimes healing doesn't come in the form of medicine or logic. It arrives in the quiet connection between 2 souls, even when they don't speak the same language. Sophie and Briggs were never just a girl and her dog. They were a reminder that love, when pure, knows no boundary, that perhaps God works not through thunder or miracles written in books, but in paw prints pressed against glass, and in a child's first whispered word after silence. The golden thread that joined them reminds us that we are never truly alone. Even in our darkest moments, there is a force, gentle, unseen, that binds us to hope. Whether you call it a miracle, a mystery, or the mercy of God, its message is the same: love can heal what science cannot explain. In your own life, never underestimate the power of presence, of listening, of quiet care. You never know whose heart your kindness might mend. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who believes in second chances. Leave a comment with the word Amen. If you believe that God's hand was guiding Sophie and Briggs all along. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that celebrate the bond between animals and humans. May God bless you and those you love.